¿Qué tal? Muy buenos días.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today here at the Inter-American Social Security Conference in person. And also, thank you for joining us via Zoom and via social media. So we will be continuing the activities in the framework of the Social Security Week. For us, it is an honor and a pleasure to have the participation of our speakers that will be talking about disability, public policies, and social security. Maria Teresa Gonzalez, a technical and legal advisor of the CISS, welcomes you on behalf of Álvaro Hernández. I also have with me Dr. Luz Ángela Cardona Acuña, Specialists Coordinator of the Social Security Institution and the Inter-American Social Security Conference. I will now to pass the floor to the Subdirector Brandon Perez Gonzalez and Dr. Sara Rosa Medina, Academic Coordinator and Higher Education Institutions Outreach Program. So welcome, Brandon, go ahead. Thank you, Counselor. Before continuing, I would like to remind you if you are joining from Zoom and social media, we are organizing the first International Health and Security Congress in workplaces with the participation of the Andean sub-region and the collaboration of the American Commission of Workplace-Related Injuries Prevention. It will be held in Mexico City at the headquarters of the CISS, and you will be able to follow it in social media. You are seeing now a QR code that will redirect you to the enrollment webpage. For our membership, is an online free Congress, and we are able to welcome you both in person and remotely. It is a forum that will be carried out on May 7th and 8th, where we will be having panels on perspectives on work-related risks. We will be having Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia's memberships. We will also be having conversations about work-related health, where we will have the Ministry of Labor joining us, the head of the Public Security Institution, and the Social and Economic Division at the IMSS representative. We'll also be talking about premiums for work-related risk on behalf of the minister. So we invite you to join us whether in person or remotely in the CISS endeavor. And I would like to remind all of your attendees that today we have simultaneous interpretation to English for this activity, both in Zoom and in social media, so that you can follow this conference in English or in Spanish. We would also like to remind you that this will be equal to 80% participation, and you will be receiving a certificate of attendance. Now I would like to thank everyone for joining us today as panelists. We would like to especially thank Catalina Torres, consultant working with us at the CISS in matters of disabilities, and Macarena Servin, Vice President on the Committee for All Forms of Discrimination Against Persons and Against Disability, Disappearance of the OAS in Paraguay, Marta Garcia of the Movement of People with Disabilities, Joan Marruanda, Advisor of Corporate Research for the Development of Social Security, COTS, Amalia Cambio Rios, Vice President of the Committee on the Rights of People with Disabilities in the UN, Flor Esperanza Rodriguez Ferro, therapist and coordinator of the Biomedical Institution, the CISO. Your presence enriches our conference in this new agenda that we are promoting here at the CISS about people living with disability. Now, let me add that this session will be divided into two. The first will be a presentation by Catalina Torres that will trigger the conversation among the panelists joining us today. And later on, I will act as a moderator asking some questions, I will register the order of their participation, and you will have up to 2 minutes to answer the question that I will be asking. Without any further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Dr. Sara Rosa so that she can introduce the first panelist, Catalina. Go ahead, doctor. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you today this morning. I would like to welcome you, warmly welcome you, and I would like to introduce Catalina Torres, consultant that will be working with us and with the CISS in the case of disabilities and public policies for disabilities. Severina Catalina Torres Cuevas is an academic and activist. She is Mexican. She is from San Luis Potosí. She's center-focused in the rights of people with disability and inclusion. She has a degree in dramatic representation, and she has a master's in political matters and public policies matters at CONACYT Center. Catalina Torres Cuevas has a wide experience in teaching Spanish to non-native speakers in Mexico, England, and other countries. She has widely worked with organizations of civil society promoting accessibility and inclusion of people with disabilities, coordinating volunteer students groups, and assessment projects. Catalina Torres Cuevas has acted as a director in Gilberto Rincón Gallardo's institution. She has been part of state councils on human rights and follow-up committees in San Luis Potosí. She has published research on the social model of disability, and she has organized consultations with the disabilities community in order to develop municipal development plans. Her work builds bridges among Mexico activism and public policies related to the rights of people with disabilities. In the inter-American field, the discussion on who should be receiving the social public policies and affirmative actions oriented towards including people with disability acquire a crucial and critical relevance. This debate does not only address justice and equality and equity, but it also reflects the fundamental and guiding principles in the region. Since it explores the different points of views around this matter, the aim is not only to understand the complexities regarding inclusion of people with disabilities, but also, above all, identifying focuses, approaches, and effective strategies that promote the full participation and respect of their rights throughout life fields. These reflections does not only enrich public debate, but it also contributes to the building of inclusive and fair societies throughout the inter-American region. Please go ahead, Catalina. The floor is all yours. I just need permission to activate my camera. Thank you. Just a moment, please.
Si me hacen favor de
Proyectar.
ahí está. Ya.
And could I also be allowed to share my screen? Thank you so much. Okay. There.
No me deja encender el video.
I'm still not able to turn on my camera. Could you help me with that? Just a second, Catalina. Thank you.
Sí. Si no, no importa, empezamos de todos modos.
If not, it is okay. I mean, I can start like that. It's okay. It doesn't matter.
Si quieren empezamos, no importa, en lo que le haya.
I can start. It's okay. It doesn't matter. While you can enable my camera, I can start.
Sí, adelante, Catalina.
Yes, go ahead, Catalina. Thank you.
Pues buenos días.
Good morning. I am very glad to be with you today to discuss a matter that I'm passionate about, public policies for people with disability. I would like to start. First slide, please. Well, I would like to start by saying that in general, the government believes that disability is something that doesn't have to be necessarily studied, or it doesn't necessarily have to be. I mean, we are still living with inertia, bringing that it is a matter of goodwill, a matter of people that are falling in disgrace because they have a problem, poor people. So the governments, despite having a convention that was signed since 2016, governments still believe these archaic, old, ancient ideas that disability is a personal problem, is not something that has to necessarily be addressed by public policies or only by public policies of social welfare, actually. So, I mean, providing wheelchairs, providing a meal, etc. And that's that, that's all the extent of the responsibility of the governments, the way we perceive it today, at least in Mexico. So very quickly, I would like to set some grounds, some foundations in order to discuss
¿Quién puede considerarse una persona
who can be considered a person with disability, because there are still many questions surrounding this, and who cannot be considered as a person with disability. Very quickly, we have some other disability models. However, we are only going to address these two, the medical model and the social model. The medical model was created along with the technological advances and progress, the worldwide ones that came in the 20th century. We don't have the same quality of life nor the same life expectancy today compared to 100 years ago. In 1924, for example, at that time, life expectancy was way less than the one we have today. Today, we are around 80 years old of age, and at that time, they would hardly turn 50 or 60. So, well, all of the medical progress has allowed people to live longer. And this helps build the medical model, seeing people as incomplete, as sick, as something's missing, so we have to give them that something. The medical model explains that the problem is the person. The person is the one that has to be fixed. So all of the policies that are developed in that sense have the idea of fixing incomplete people. That's the main goal. On the contrary, the social model explains that it is not the person that has the problem, but the society. The society that doesn't have that planning, that doesn't plan in order to meet the needs of people with disabilities. This means that the person is not the one having a problem if they cannot walk. It's the society that is the one having a problem when they have obstacles and barriers that prevent people with disability from developing themselves. And that's the same for any other type of disability. Next, please. Here we have two definitions of disability. One goes back to 1980, and this is by the WHO. Any and every restriction or absence of capability of carrying out an activity within the margin of what's considered normal for a human being. Well, so they were called abnormal because they couldn't do a normal activity. This means that the restriction lies on the person. And here we see a figure, an image of a person, and the arrows are pointing at that person, which indicates that the problem lies on the person. And it goes hand in hand with the WHO definition. In 2006, the definition and the convention hasn't really issued a clear and specific definition. However, it established everything necessary so we can all work on a definition on what disability is. So it reads that disability is a concept that evolves, and that's the result of the interaction between people with deficiencies and the barriers to attitude and environment that prevent their full participation in the society under equal conditions. So here the problem is not the person, but the environment, the surroundings. This was a radical change of paradigm. I mean, we cannot establish the same policies that we would establish before as of this social model and what many consider the date of birth of the social convention, which gave in turn birth to the new definition of what a disability is. Next one, please. So the medical model, as I mentioned before, is just that the problem is you. You are the problem, so you as a person with disability has to solve, to fix your problem. So here we have an image where the doctor, the physician will say you will be integrated when you go to the other side, you go down the stairs, you go up and down the mountain, you cross the river. So the medical model of inclusion lies on the person with the disability. Next one, please. So now we are going to see that disability does not depend on the person. Here we have a picture of a person at the center of the slide, and they cannot use the different services. For example, a public restroom, at a restaurant, at a place where they could attend, they cannot use the public restroom. Here, they even have a signal that the bathroom is accessible. Many times, people think that just by adding a sign, then the restroom will magically turn into accessible, but that's not the way it works. Of course, transportation, that's not accessible either. Design is not accessible either. The lack of culture that we have, the lack of respect, not only towards people with disability, but in general. In general, we have a problem. We lack culture, the proper culture and education. So here we have people with certain diagnoses. Let's assume that they cannot use their legs, that they cannot stand up, let's say. But here we will see what happens with the next slide, please. Here we have a person that lives by themselves, that could have the possibility of living by themselves without any problems because the place where they live is properly adapted. They can use the public transportation under equal conditions. This person can also have a job under equal conditions. So this person doesn't really need to be hired along with other people in wheelchairs. So everyone in a wheelchair, come and we will hire you. No. I'm sure this person was able to go to school, study whatever degree they wanted, and now this person can work for what he studied. At night, he can go to a nightclub, to a bar, to whatever he wants to, just as any other person, because he doesn't have any problem using public facilities. In this case, it would be a bar, a nightclub, and he can go back home without any problems. So let's assume that this person here has the same deficiency, the same diagnosis as the one you just saw in the previous slide. But they don't have the same disability, definitely. It is not the same disability, definitely. Not the same as the previous person at all. But it doesn't depend on this person's diagnosis. It depends on the environment, on the surroundings. The next one, please. So, well, what does the convention state? Exactly this, that it is the combination between deficiencies and barriers, obstacles, which result in a disability. But then it is not a deficiency by itself. And that's not in it by itself. I mean, a deficiency in itself does not generate disability. The disability is generated when you add barriers, when you add obstacles. So we have to have both of them in order to result in disability. Next one, please.
Muy bien.
Very well. So the social model, according to the Supreme Court of Justice, according to the sentences and ruling, well, the government is a little bit behind. The Mexican Supreme Court of Justice, nevertheless, has progressed in the study and in settling the foundations, as at least, so that public policies can be developed in the right direction. So what we have here is that what the Supreme Court states is the following. Disability, its legal analysis under the light of a social model stated in the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. The social model states that the cause generating a disability is the context in which the person develops. So, under the light of each model, the disability should be considered as a disadvantage caused by the barriers and obstacles that the social organization generates when it doesn't understand properly the needs of peoples with functional diversities. So it could be concluded that disabilities are not diseases. So the conclusion is that the disability is not a disease. Next, please. Now, considering the previously stated description, and if we include this in a social model, we should then discuss what has been traditionally compared. And this is very important to understand. The comparison among disabilities and diseases. Because understanding the nature of this model, any disability should be conceived by addressing the constraints limited by the contextual barriers and obstacles related to functional diseases. And now it is important to remember here that a functional disability, this should be understood as a deficiency. But here they don't use the word deficiency anymore. They used functional diversity related to functional diversities constituting an autonomous term. So disability is an autonomous term. It's not the same, hence, it is not included in the concept of a disease. And I think that's the presentation. However, I'd like to add that, and I don't know if you have the video, if we could play the video. I would really like for you to look at this video that was taken
Hace 2 semanas.
today, the 29th, so it was recorded 2 weeks ago. in the INE meetings, the Electoral National Institute. We are under an electoral process today, and there are some affirmative actions that are happening for people with disability so that they can be a candidate, so that they could also access other sort of benefits, so to speak. And let's see, this is a meeting. This is a meeting of the council. These are all councillors of the Electoral National Institute, INE. So, let's see what a councillor says in this sense. Could you please press play? So through this agreement project, we are accepting certain rulings, sentences, but I want to discuss two of them. There's a case where the higher court stated that fibromyalgia that a candidate aspiring is enough so that she can be a candidate to comply with an affirmative action in favor of people with disability. I send a written observation to explain that the National Council of the INE is not authorized to state the seriousness of a disease, and if we can, we adhere to what the medical records state. However, as of what the higher court established, that appears that they want for us to be the ones that determine the seriousness of the disease, I found it important to mention this observation in the session. Now, secondly, this means that, well, they're talking about the disability as a disease. And she talks about how serious this disease can be so that it can be considered as a disability. This is what the Superior Court is asking them, mandating them to do. So we're talking about a person that represents an institute where there isn't any guideline, there isn't a notion that the disability is not a disease. So, well, that's all I would like to share with you. So we can start with a conversation afterwards. Thank you, Catalina. I think this presentation triggers a conversation. For the next stage, before introducing our panelists, I would like to remind you that the Inter-American Social Security Conference has a golden certificate in equality and non-discrimination in labor matters, and these activities, besides being basis foundations of social security, we also promote all sorts of equality and non-discrimination, gender equality, sexual orientation, and now inclusion of people with disability. And I have the pleasure to introduce all of our panelists, emphasizing the fact that we have multi-sectorial, high-level specialists panel. So we would like to thank you on behalf of the Secretary General to making some room in your agendas to be with us today. So first of all, I would like to introduce Soma Ferreira, Vice President of the Committee for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against People with Disability of the OAS. Sulma is a professional with a sound academic education and a wide knowledge in psychology and social work. She's a specialist in clinical psychology. She has a master in social development with a summa cum laude distinction and a specialization in rehabilitation of people with disability. She has trained in social and economic policies, tools for social management, and evaluation of social programs. She has participated in international training courses on rehabilitation policies and people leadership, people with disability leadership. She has had role of leadership in inclusion of people with disability. She has been a vice president of the second committee for people with disability at the OAS, and she has also held important positions in Senadis and at Vida Independiente SEO institution. Her work focuses on the inclusion of people with disability. Thank you so much, Solma. Welcome. We also have Marta García, co-founder of Movimiento de Personas con Discapacidad. Marta is an activist for the rights of people with disability, co-founder and general coordinator of the Movimiento de Personas con Discapacidad in Mexico and in Latin America. She has participated in different fora of the public and private sector to talk about matters of awareness and inclusion of people with disabilities, human rights, non-discrimination, inclusive language, women with disability, labor and work inclusion, among others. She works with different organizations and groups that work with people with disability and supports with the outreach among these groups. She's working to get her degree at the National Mexican Autonomous University on Social Studies. Thank you so much, Marta. Welcome. We also have John Maruanda Restrepo, investigation and research advisor for Social Development Institution at Colombia. He's a surgeon by the Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana, specialized in nuclear medicine by the National Institute of Cancerology, Universidad Javeriana de Bogotá, and he has a master in economy of health and health management by Pompeu Fabra University in 1999. He has a wide experience in analysis and evaluation of public policy and social politics and protection. At the Ministry of Health, she has worked in health management divisions. He has worked in Ibero-American Liaisons Against Cancer, the Colombian Liaison Against Cancer. He worked as a director in the community of citizen participation institutions in the control of public management. He has also taught in postgraduate studies and pregraduate studies at the University Jorge Tadeo Lozano, and he has been a guest catedratic at Savannah University. Welcome, John, and thank you for being with us today. We also have Amalia Gamiot Rios, Vice President of the Committee on the Rights of People with Disabilities of the UN. Amalia was born in Mexico City. She's a doctor at UNAM, and she studied medicine at UNAM. And she's director of the studies on people with disabilities and their rights at the Universidad of Salamanca. And she has worked in the draft of the rights of people with disability in the UN until it was approved by the General Assembly in 2006. She was elected as a member of the Committee for the Rights of People with Disability from 2019 to 2022, and she was re-elected for the period of 2023-2026. Currently, she is also the Vice President of the Committee for the 2023-2024 period. She's co-president of the working group on disinstitutionalization efforts, where she prepared guidelines on disinstitutionalizing, including emergency situations approved by the plenum of the committee on September 9, 2022. She was a member of the working and task force that developed the Article 8 on the right to employment. She's a member of the Division of Complaints of Women and Girls with Disability, and she's also in charge of the General Observation for Article 11 of the Convention on Risk and Emergency Situations, Humanitarian Risk Situations. Welcome, Amalia. Last but not least, we have Flor Esperanza Rodriguez Ferro. She is an occupational therapist, and she has a sound academic development and a wide professional experience in health and social inclusion. She's a graduate of the Columbia National University. She has continued her education with postgraduate studies in occupational health management, as she has two masters, one in disability and social inclusion, another one in education. She's certified by the Collaborative Center of the WHO PAHO divisions as an instructor of functioning disability and health departments. She has a knowledge in assessment and scoring of disability and work ability. Her experience covers different positions, including consultancy for the Ministry of Health and Social Protection in Colombia, in implementation of international standards, and the construction for the score of lack of work ability. She has led the National Coordination for Educational Inclusive Programs, as well as rehabilitation strategies in the community for people with disability and vulnerable population. As a consultant and advisor, has contributed to the design of processes related to disability, the educational, social, and labor inclusion, rehabilitation, work reintegration, and health and security in the workplace. She has also been a critical element in the creation of decrees and tools for the score of loss of workability, as well as the certification of disability, both in Colombia and in Dominican Republic. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. As I mentioned at the beginning, I am going to share two questions. One question, sorry. So through the Zoom tool, please raise your hand. I will write down your questions, and the panelists will have 2 minutes so that they can answer said questions. And the first question is about what are the differences between the medical model and the social model on disability? So Dr. Amalia will answer first. Afterwards, we will have Flor. Zulma will be in 3rd place. If another panelist wants to answer, please let me know. Amalia, please go ahead. Thank you. It is an honor to be at the Inter-American Social Security Conference, CISS, where I have several certificates of attendance. And I would also like to thank Catalina Torres for the invitation, the kind invitation. Well, the differences are huge. First, Catalina already said it very well, and as letter E of the introduction of the convention, and she already read it, because disability is a concept that evolves, an evolving concept. It's changing, it will continue to change. So the most important aspect of what Catalina mentioned, which is a paradigm change, is that the interaction of people with disabilities or with deficiencies and the barriers that the society builds, so it prevents them from being in an equal condition situation compared to the rest. Secondly, I would say that it clearly recognizes that it is the society, the one that doesn't provide a person with disability the right aid to be on their equality of opportunities, but it even places barriers and obstacles. That's what's worse. And the third element of this change of paradigm is that it doesn't accept that society protects people with disability, but as it has been mentioned before, they have to provide equal opportunities so they can include. And Catalina already showed several tools that could offer equal opportunities, that there aren't physical barriers, nor communication barriers, nor information barriers, and to have the right tools, as a JAWS screen reader for people with poor vision. And unfortunately, the model, the medical model, is still very present. And I will say the most transcendent and revolutionary change was produced when the option was changing from believing that a person with disability was a merely receiver of assistance, of aid, towards one that considers them as a subject of rights, where the focus of disability stopped being focusing on the person, and it was moved to the barriers. And the acceptance of human rights movement that is in the convention has as a consequence the fact that society has to organize their political and economical structure, including people with disability, respecting the dignity of those that are different. And as I said before, it is unfortunate that almost 20 years after the convention was enforced, the medical model still prevails in almost all of the state members. We've already saw it in the INE video, and it is not only that, but it doesn't consider that the other forms of protectionism are part of the medical model, such as insisting with special ed schools, denying legal capacity on people that have intellectual disability, or institutionalizing without the consent of the people with psychosocial disability, or denying boys and girls with disability the right to sexual education. Thank you very much. Thank you, Amalia. Your information is very interesting, and this intersectionality in this group in situation of vulnerability that has to be considered. If it's okay with you, when you are only 30 seconds away from finishing the 2 seconds, I will raise my hand to let you know so that you see that you have 30 seconds left, and because I don't want to interrupt you. Flor, please go ahead. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity, for this invitation. Today, I would like to specifically address a research project that's called the National Situation of People with Disability that have been duly certified that are non-subject to invalidity insurance, and we include social benefits that they may be receiving due to disability. It is important for me that you know that this was a research process that is in the last stage already between the National Autonomous University of Colombia, the Faculty of Medicine, the Department of Human Foundation that I represent today, and the Corporation for the Development of Social Security, the COES. So as a result of this research project that had the participation of 3 different territories that were selected within Colombia, and its scope was not only a documentary review of the current status of that multidimensional situation, but that it took also into account analyzing the implementation of public policies where the certification of a disability, which is maybe one of the most important challenges throughout the community, not only for institutional players, but also people with disability, became a critical element. With this same idea in mind and to focus on the question at hand, it is important to take into account that in Colombia, since 2018, this certification process started not only as a response to the model transitioning, but also as a response to our legislative changes, since what it was found, and which is part of the conclusions of this study that will be socialized very soon in Colombia in May, has to do with the fact that the entrance to the certification process of people with disability is the medical model or the biomedical model, which means that in Colombia, in order to be able to certify a person, initially we start from a medical identification of a medical examination where one of the requirements is the medical records. And this is something that we would also investigate, research. What barriers these people still facing? And in this sense, yes, many barriers have been overcome. However, one critical one is still the fact that in our territory and in the territories that were taken into account, many people do not even have a clinical record, a medical record, which means that they have been recognized as people with disability. They are recognized as people with disability because of the difficulties that they have had to live. However, in Colombia, the entrance door is that medical process that once it is uploaded in the different systems, allow people to be able to access an interdisciplinary assessment in order to be certified. Hence, we don't see a clear transition of these models. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Flor. Actually, it's important to add that we heard of the research that CODES, CODES was doing, and that's why we wanted to invite you in this first meeting between the Andean region and our conversation, because this strengthens the work that we do at the conference. So we will be very attentive to the publication of this effort. And disability has been quite interesting by the statutory division. I would like to welcome Jorge D'Angelo and the president of Prevention, Graciela Gil, Prevention in Work-Related Risk. So thank you so much for being with us today. Please go ahead, Zulma. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to share this moment with all of you. What I wanted to add, because almost everything has already been said, about both models. But what I wanted to show you is that regarding the social model, and despite still being under the medical rehabilitating model, the social model, or well, the convention brought many changes, and these changes have been analyzed slowly but surely. For example, we have adhered to Article 19, which talks about independence of people with disability. And above all, it talks about a human or animal aid being provided. So human aid wise, we are working at a Latin American level on the education of personal assistants that could support people with a disability. I'm going to be brief, and I'm going to ask Marta to discuss a little bit further because she is, as well as I am, working in this. But she is part of the Latin American network of an independent life, and in May, they will have a meeting in Colombia. So I would like to pass the floor to her so that she can provide some continuity. Thank you. Thank you, Sulma. And yes, I had Marta's participation already on record here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I am very excited. First of all, because of the invitation. Thank you so much for the invitation. And also because I will be able to share with these amazing people. And I would like to go back to the medical model for a moment, because it appears that we just take this for granted. And I think that the medical model, on one hand, is quite focused on disability, yes, on on perceiving people as someone sick, in trying to restore their health, and for them to be cured. For them to include their physical limitations and constraints. And well, this person, through this medical treatment, will go back and readdress their lives. However, it is always focused on the medical element. And this is something that we have been carrying over since the World War II. And it is something that we still see prevailing. However, socially speaking, this has fully changed because the participation is already centered in the person with disability. So a person with disability, of course, can also raise their voice, and they have the right to fight for their rights, actually. So this aims to eliminate social and physical barriers posed before them. We are also fighting for empowerment and autonomy of the people with disability. And what Solma was just saying, there will be a meeting in Colombia, and this is in order to, through Article 19, aim for them to be able to live independently and included in the community, to have a right to be able to coexist as any other person, but also guaranteeing this equality in opportunities. Something that Catalina mentioned was being able to be accessible and to carry out the right adjustments so that people can have access to equality, so they can develop themselves in any field, if they want to go to school, if they want to have fun. So this social model changes the vision towards persons with disabilities, because they have the right to be able to relate to other people in other environments, because it appears that only people with disability will meet with other people with disability. And this is, of course, false. It's wrong, because we can be in any environment. So this social model has come to change all of this idea existing about people with disability from the medical point of view, thinking that we are sick, looking at us with pity. It used to be believed that we were even people that were not even fit for life, right? So basically, that'll be all. These are the differences I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much, Marta. I would like to take advantage to thank you for your immediate availability, because you were the first panelist to accept the invitation. So this conference will be an echo for your words and for the conference that will happen in Colombia. And we will be very glad to know a little bit more about it. And John, thank you. You also raised your hand. Please go ahead. Thank you so much. I would like to highlight the intervention of Professor Esperanza. Despite not being an expert in the matter, in the world of people with disabilities, I see many possibilities, and I agree with her that we have left the medical model, yes, but not enough, because people have developed great abilities in other fields, in the emotional field, in the cognitive field as well. And I think that the fact that we are always seen at the dysfunctional element has a negative point of view from Constitution. And that's a constraint. That's also a legal constraint in promoting other abilities. The second thing is that people focused on this social element to remove the series of barriers, not only physical, but also social ones, because people with disability have a huge opportunity to participate in other type of social policies, not only in those that are related to their disability. I think that it is also a constraint that being set in the political participation field. So in some way, I think we need to go from that dysfunctionality criteria to because we do a positive discrimination. So we need to go to an advanced political environment because people with disability can are not only able to make an opinion on their own situation, but also in other political scopes. For example, education. Colombia, for example, has very serious problems in terms of the groups of boys, girls, and adolescents that are not able to finish primary school. And this is a huge problem. So I think that the social political aspects are also another element where people with disability could participate, not only from their own disability, but also in the general environment. Thank you, John. Actually, I was remembering that last March, we had a forum on the inclusion of people with disability to the workplace. We had the participation of Brazil, and they were actually saying what you said. In Brazil, there's still a quota in companies that have to cover, that the companies have to cover. But this sector claims that sometimes people with disability don't have academic profiles to be able to cover these positions. And it is because one of their rights has been violated, the right to an education. That's why they cannot go have a formal job. Flor, I think you raised your hand. Afterwards, we will go to Amar. Yes, I would like to complete what Dr. Marulanda was discussing. Based on the object of study and in the framework of Social Security, a relevant finding is to take into account that normally it is believed from public policies for people with disability. However, one of our representative findings is that in terms of public policies, well, public policy should be only one. We should be talking about one public policy, and that public policy, for example, in terms of disability, well, people with disability feel that they participated, but they are still left out. They are still left out in terms of gender perspective, for example, equity perspective, for example. Another important element that's the result of this research effort and elaborated interviews to 18 relevant players is that one thing is to talk about intersectoriality and another thing is to talk about intersectionality. And under this framework, the variability of intersectionality in terms of public policies and disability is quite far what the policy defines from what people expect, as well as the different players and what they expect. Thank you so much, Flor. Personally, I really like to follow up on this intersectionality because we've been told that we should have 3 different levels of intersectionality to have a comprehensive policy. But it has been quite hard to be able to implement it and to have these comprehensive policies. Please go ahead, Amalia. Yes, I would like to address what Dr. Maru was saying. Sorry, Dr. Marulanda. because he was saying that the social focus is limiting the political participation of people with disability. I don't really think so, because the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability, Article 4.3 states that people with disability should participate in everything. Article 24 talks about education. Of course, they have to participate in public policies on education. And Article 29 on the political participation of people with disability. So the social model of disability, the one that's included in the convention, also includes the political and public participation of people with disability. I would also like to add that the quotas that are assigned for companies, well, in Mexico, we also have those, as well as many other countries. And yes, it's hard for it to be thoroughly understood. That's why I recommend for you to read General Observation number 8 on Article 27 of the Convention, that explains how we could apply Article 27 on the right to work. And on intersectionality, I'm glad that you like it, my dear colleague. But this is not only in the sense of liking it, because intersectionality is present in every person with disability. Persons with disability are women, boys and girls, adults, LGBTI, displaced migrants. I mean, it is mandatory to talk about intersectionality. And last but not least, I'd like to say that I am also an honored guest to the Conference of Bogota. Thank you very much. Thank you, Amalia. And we are now in the second question, which is what the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities states on who could be a person with disability and who can. So in this sense, I will start registering your participations. Amalia, I don't know if anyone else wants to continue. Flor, Marta, and if someone else wants to address the question, please let me know. Just
Please go ahead,
Amalia.
Amalia. Okay, yes, thank you so much. I would just like to mention that it is interesting that during the different call for this type of meeting, well, we just mentioned the specific aspect that we are not really defining what are people with disabilities. We had a convention that took place 3 times a week as well. And we also need to highlight that also the organizations with persons with disabilities had a key role in the development of a draft. Therefore, it is an international convention that has been drafted. And we know that the motto, nothing without us, that means that it's not that we did not dare. The fact is that we also discussed on whether to really draft a definition or not. After several discussions, so we would like to just have a preamble as well. And we know that disability is a evolving concept. We know that persons with disabilities are going to have physical, mental, intellectual, or sensorial issues. When interacting with different barriers, they may see some sort of prevention of a full participation in equal conditions. And in such a way, we are also discussing the fact that disabilities, we're not only talking about just psychosocial capacity after 20 years. We know that whenever we have a cross-disciplinary group, let's see whether there's disability or not. In agreement with a person, then they find these conditions that we just mentioned. We know, let's to be considered a person with a disability, and it is no longer considered to be just a disease as such. Let's see the situation that people face. People, whenever they're in that type of situation, they're the ones who are with a specific disability, regardless of the source of that disability. So that's important to note as well. Thank you. Thank you so much, Amalia. Please go ahead, Flor. Sure. We know that the concept of disability is an evolving concept, and we know that based on our research, that's one of the main starting points. And well, we need to take into account the following. The convention is very clear when it comes to outlining, and this is where we're going to be discussing this classification as well. And also health of that interconnection that we have between a variable that we have, and that stems from that issue that may arise with a given person. And that is going to enable an important element that in my case is a core topic, at least in my profession. We know that the occupation activities of daily life are only taken not only to execution, but also to participation. However, I would like to really call people to work on this because we have an investigation. Whenever we have this type of variables, disabilities, as an evolving concept, but as a concept that at the same time also relies on being able to just identifying those barriers, the impact that we have. In this case, we were talking about people with disabilities, and that's precisely where, in my case, personally, I'm going to see some challenges, some difficulties. In the case of the certification of disabilities in Colombia, there's a core topic which is measurement of everything that takes place. It is structural situation, not only cross-disciplinary teams, but also people themselves and carers and a body as an investigator, as a researcher. We have some instruments, some tools that we have developed so that we can really characterize, so that we can meter something that I call disability. That is something that is also part of what we do, and also in understanding what is that impact. We consider as a reference what we have as Pillar 2.0 of the WHO. In this case, whenever we work with the different companies, we measure everything in the investigation. And I just need to really focus on what is medical. I do not feel that they can actually manage to size or dimension the barriers that we have as persons with disabilities. And a relevant conclusion of the findings facing a certification is that public policy also have to do with the transformation of those social scenarios where we would just be facing those barriers. That means that we have some study scopes, health, recreation, culture, sports, access to a house. And what we found is that people with disabilities as carers, even if it's a small group of participants specific for this research, what they feel, well, that has not really created any sort of impact on their lives or on the transformation of their barriers, because they feel precisely that just by metering and characterizing them, they can just really tell what is the impact. And sometimes this is not something that can be achieved. This is something that is superficial. So we know that this characterization only restricts itself to the concept of disease. So whenever you are having a diagnosis, if the cross-disciplinary team is just doing this diagnosis as such, and we start just metering the different variables of a participation, then they're going to be parts of a disability. Many persons with the same clinical condition will end up being certified as persons with disabilities. Okay, thank you so much, Flor. Please go ahead, Marta, and I also have the participation of Katarina on the line. Thank you. I think that another important part that we would like to highlight and that we already mentioned previously is that there's something that I feel that is very important, is that sometimes the term temporary disability is also being used, and this may be some sort of injury. Maybe you got fractured, and that means that you only fractured your foot, but just for a very specific period of time. So you're going to be wearing a cast, or maybe you're going to undergo surgery, or you may have to use crutches or maybe a wheelchair, but that's precisely just a matter of just something that is going to be temporary. That doesn't mean that you have a disability as such. So the barriers that you end up having after this fracture, well, you're going to get the cast removed and probably you're going to have to go, let's say, to take rehab. And the fact that, or the reason why you were immobilized, that means that you will also have to take this rehab. However, this is something that is temporary, and that's just an injury. It's not a temporary capacity. And I feel that that's important to note because these abilities are somehow accumulating deficiencies that we could probably have maybe whenever we have some sort of sensorial issues and some others. However, this is something that is going to determine the barriers that we're going to face, or the fact that maybe I'm going to have a wheelchair, or the fact that I cannot have public transportation, like I just haven't. This is something that limits participation, and that's a disability. And so I just really wanted to highlight that part as well. Thank you. Now, on the contrary, before we pass the floor to Catalina, I would like to just really comment on the questions that we have here on Zoom, and one of the panelists have already answered them. We were just really listening a participant. She said that it would be nice to have the different parameters that are used to grant pensions, retirement pensions, specifically in case of someone with a disability, and how this affects the functioning of the given disability in health. So I would like to pass the floor to the table for your consideration, and let's just pass the floor to Catalina. At first, I absolutely agree with Martha. This is a temporary capability that's well, it's just a disease. I mean, there's no such thing as temporary disability. That's what I meant. Because we know that that's not a disability as such. That's just something that is considered a disease. On the other hand, I would like to mention that disabilities go beyond what we consider to be a disease. And at no point in time, this cannot be considered as something that could be considered disability, and something that could not start as a disease. I may have someone. So this is something that has been denied. The possibility of just taking part or working somewhere. In many other aspects, there are no other issues other than that. There are no other deficiencies as well. And in practical terms, this is not a disease. This is not something that started from a disease or anything else. And this does not mean that things cannot be done. This means to the fact that there's social rejection. Well, they may say, well, I have a disability in that case. So a doctor may just, I don't know, just say a person, you can do anything you want, you have no limitations. That's what I mean. I don't know if I'm being clear. But Amalia, I don't know if you can tell us, for instance, about the situation of an albino person, just so that it becomes clearer. And also, another thing that I would like to point out is that right now, we are just, well, it's been over 2 decades, and we're just starting to get into a standard that helps us classify a disability. We're just going to put some implementations. 2 months ago, this standard was released. And now concerning a question that the person raised, how can we measure that? How can we do all of that? That's where we need to find that out. That's where we need to have that, or that's how we can really start just really working on all of the systems. I forgot the name of these systems. What was the name for it? Systems for So social security systems, that's what I meant. Yes. So we're just beginning, that's the thing, we're just getting there. Thank you. Thank you so much, Catalina. Please go ahead, Zulma. Okay. Hello, can you hear me there? Yes, we can. Okay. So I just wanted to comment on the fact that I would like to break down the word disability. Because whenever we talk about disability, one of the things that happen just very frequently is that, well, this is not a term that has been properly used. Well, whenever we have a person with disability, whenever we say person, that means that it's a person who has rights. And disability, that's just to somehow make the barriers visible, because there are barriers that need to be overcome, and for that person to be included in environment, in the society at large. However, to this day, we have not really seen this way. This is just to identify any disabilities that a person may have. Okay, thank you, Zulma. Now I'll pass the floor and then to Amalia. Thank you. Okay, thank you. I will focus more specifically on the question that was related to a comment in the chat. I just wanted to mention that in the framework of the National Action and Corporation for Development of ORCODES framework, we specifically developed an activity that started from a scope and review and the PRISMA methodology SRE, just by really considering a large number of countries. Accordingly, just by doing everything that we need to do in terms of inclusion, criteria exclusion, because we need to have a series of very relevant results that we expect to have published. And for you to have an idea, well, we had countries like Argentina, Germany, Bolivia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, and they clearly started with this process since 2018, where we had a temporary resolution. Then we were able to have this in Costa Rica, Ecuador, the US, Finland, France, India, Israel, Italy, Japan, Mexico, Peru, Poland, and we were all able to manage in terms of a BARIM. What is it that is being understood? What are the capabilities? What are the metrics? And to what extent this incorporation has taken place? The incorporation of this international classification of the functioning of disabilities and health. So in general terms, we can tell you that it is a need, a global need that we could see whenever we're using a certificate. And whenever we do that, well, basically, we have a systematic review that is also conducted as such, and it also has very relevant results on how an important incorporation is being made, for instance, in South America, or let's say how a certificate has a very important aspect in terms of rights, not only when it comes to social and health protection, but also in terms of rehab. So I believe that it's also important to consider in Colombia that we have a very specific differentiation. Whenever we think about disability, we need to think about how to qualify whatever countries call as disability, loss of occupational abilities. So we know that there are some other countries like Colombia where these concepts have been incorporated in both contexts. I have had the possibility of also taking part of the consulting teams, not only in terms of the metrics that are used to just really meet the criteria for that of all the different workers that require financial, let's say, aspects. We're not even talking about a disability, because we know that a disability is the highest degree or extent of restrictions, of limitations. So I would like to just really share with you our progress very soon it is something that it's coming, that is going to be just reviewed, and it is just for you to be able to see what has been the progress in Colombia. Thank you. Thank you, Flora. Please go ahead, Amalia. Thank you. I just wanted to comment a couple of things. I think that it's very interesting to refer to the study that Flora just referred to, and also what is the difference between the different social security systems and what they do. What they do is that for them to grant a pension fund, they just make sure that that person has a given disability in a given percentage. And on the other hand, I do not really like using the terms of the WHO because in many cases the conventions on the rights of persons with disabilities and the WHO, we have really clashed. We are in disagreement in terms of what really makes up a psychosocial disability. But I really wanted to really just somehow restate what I mentioned. We are going to have this determination of disability. Even for us to be able to determine pensions, this has to be a cross-disciplinary team where we can find different types of persons, like we heard from Suma before, so that they can have contrasting activities, so that they can contrast also the person, the disabilities, and the barriers. And I also wanted to reply to what Catalina was asking, which I believe to be very important on albine persons. So, of course, we know that if these persons are having limitations, that means that there are persons with disabilities. We have had a lot of complaints from countries like Tanzania or countries that still have a lot of albine persons. It is a terrible situation, and they even, if they're albine, they have to get their limbs somehow cut out because they feel, or they have this type of cultural ideas where they feel that they have magical powers. So they're not really preventing this type of situation of mutilation or even murders of albine persons. So accordingly, we know that they are at risk, absolutely. So there's no question that there are persons with disabilities. And we have had a lot of complaints that where they say that they do not have access to justice in these cases. Thank you so much. Thank you, Amalia. Thank you so much for this experience. We have some time constraints, so that's why we have to go to question number 3 so that we can address all 4. And I'm going to just repeat this question to all of you. What and how is it our changes in social policies really changing or affecting or having an impact on persons? And first, I would like to pass the floor to the floor, and next to Martha and to Amalia. And we are going to have a 4th person. I do not see that person on screen. Sulma, I'm sorry. Yes, my apologies. Perfect. All right, so let's begin. If other panel members agree, if you would like to just have some sort of interventions, please just raise your hand. Sure. I have a very interesting question. What did we think of a different approach? Let's say before the pandemic and after the pandemic, just really have that focus, that approach, not only in terms of the investigation and research that we started, because we found that in terms of public policies, and specifically related to disabilities, one of the main stakes in history is not only the consolidation of the social movements, but also the leaders, males and females, that specifically represent these groups in particular. They are populations of groups of people with disabilities. So in the study, we got to a very important finding, and that's that the pandemic had a very significant impact on something that has been already been built on. Secondly, in Colombia, more specifically, it is important to also consider that with every change in administration, we know that some national development plans that were in place already are not only going to have these perspectives and disabilities, but also multiple perspectives and all of the considerations. Of course, after every change in administration, this may become problematic at a state level. And well, according to that, one of our conclusions has been that to us, it is very difficult that we found in this research that we know that some national development plans that were already there would just be left unattended, and then they would just try to update it or create a new one. And that, of course, has an impact on public policies. And even though public policies in Colombia since 2003 have had significant changes and evolutions, it is also important to note, and it is one of the conclusions that we have after the pandemic. Well, the pandemic did affect public policies. It also have an impact on the perspective of everything that we have been working on, and also, well, it affected some other aspects. We know that these policies of disabilities are not operating just by at the state's own initiatives. No, it is based on what families manage to do or what they manage to run and operate, and all of that is down to leaders. If those leaders somehow disappear, that means that we're just going to be really talking about all of this. I would like to finish with an example. One of our territories where we wanted to conduct this investigation or our research is very close to Bogota, Colombia. It's called Suaya. And to our surprise, starting as researchers, when we started working on field, we got first, and we made sure that the committee that is just representing persons with disabilities stopped just really existing from the very moment of the pandemic, meaning in 2020. Today, in 2024, this is something that did not continue to work and something that was not consolidated. We do not have representatives. I have to think how I work as a state from what we call a mayor's office or the city hall, but this is not something that is done in a very specific public policy. So we could say that it is important to just really analyze three aspects. The impact of a phenomenon that was global and that is also relevant to us in research, or second, the impact of changes in government. We have had this very long year in the government. It is very clear that we're putting our stakes and it is disabilities topics. So we also need to consider that public policies do undergo important changes in perspective that we see in a government plan, also some changes in the perspective that will come from the same public policy. So accordingly, it is also important to us to consider all of these variables. Thank you very much, Flor. Please go ahead, Marta. And also knowing that social policies include or should not include the participation, in this case, of persons with disabilities, or that these persons with disabilities may be those who just make a decision or who talk of, let's say, some needs. I also think that it is important that, or like the comment that Flor just mentioned in the case of Mexico, as part of this government, something that has happened is that we've had certain regression regarding the social policy that right now, well, has not really led to progress, but it has just really given some sort of existential part where there's this is something that this is something we have seen as well. So we know that, of course, we are going to take into consideration people's participation. However, this is something that we've seen with organizations from the civil society, of course, some persons with disabilities, and something that we all need to look for. And more importantly, I think that the government also needs to continue fostering this action so that, well, yes, we do think about, so like we just mentioned as well, we need to think about, well, at least in Mexico, we need to think and consider that education. So it's something that we mentioned as well. And right now, whenever we have to think about this, we're obviously not going to really have any disabilities as well, academic disabilities, so we can really develop this program. This is something that is going to also translate into other aspects as well. This is going to be just less paid, and we have this. So we know that we have to be doing all of this. And this is not something that this isn't going to just really make sure that you're going to get access to medical service. Okay, thank you. Maybe you can just retake the principles of human rights. I think that this is a cross independence that we have. Please go ahead, Mari. Thank you, Oscar. So I think that this is something that needs to have an impact on social policies so that we can just really do other things, such as, let's say, the fact that we need to enforce a section in the law that talks about just everything that we do. We start just really talking about the different rights. We're talking about cross-disciplinary teams, like we mentioned, so that we can evaluate disability, so that we can assess, and in a close consultation with the different bodies that are representing them, we just need to reform the policies and everything so that they can be harmonized with conventions, inter-American, international, and well, they do have a budget for that compliance, and also that in these laws they can have the active and permanent participation of people with disabilities, and that those situations take place at all levels so that they can really have access to physical disabilities of information, communication for persons with different types of disabilities, so that we can just really somehow start enforcing the different conventions to which the state parties that agreed to ratify these instruments are subject to. So I would like to highlight something that Martha mentioned, and this is a clear example in Mexico of the persistence of this existentialist model. And we need to hand over money to persons with disabilities. I mean, that's something that we agreed with. However, with that, we're not just performing, that's just an existentialistic model. We need to really work with everything that has to do with this Latin American progress of conventions. And it is a very clear example where we see that we're still part of this existentialistic policy. We're not really thinking or considering that we really need to meet all of the requirements for us to be able to socially include them. And I would like to just really retake a comment that Susan Esperanza mentioned. I am just really thinking about just carers in general. And if we have to just continue respecting the autonomy of persons with disabilities, and we do not think of some sort of step back, we need to talk about personal assistance, because we know that being carers, that means that we need to go back to something that we considered in the past, how a person with disability requires attention and personal attention and assistance in general. That's my very personal opinion. This movement internationally has been widely disseminated because it started with what we call the defense of women's rights. And I absolutely agree with the fact that people who are personal assistants, they also need to have some recognition of their work. They need to be paid for that service. They need to have social benefits as well. But I will continue to insist on the fact that I want to say that we need to talk about personal assistance and not curse, and this is something I have insisted everywhere. Thank you. Thank you, Amalia. Before we pass the floor to Sulma, I just wanted to pass the floor to Flor so that she can comment on this Amalia's comment. But just a very valuable comment. First, thank you for your comment. But here in Colombia, we have two both trends. We have a very strong movement of carers, a very strong movement because we have really managed to foster bills of law in terms of a lot of aspects that have not been approved by our Chamber of Representatives or by our Congress. It is important to note and consider, this is aligned with what Amalia mentioned, this is something that really gets our attention in Colombia. These are the results of the investigation, and that means that in Colombia specifically, this has been recognized internationally. We have incorporated this last year the policy of care. The policy of care that has origins in a very different perspective. And NESI in Colombia, specifically in Bogota, the policy of care as well. This is mainly focusing on persons with disabilities. And this is something that is also considering what we have to do. And we're just thinking about the care of carers as well. And this is something that we need. What is it that we understand as a policy of care? In Colombia, we're talking about a policy of care that we know that has been taken to a level of law. We have a law that is specific and that is really talking about this topic. So we're also talking about the perspective of a carer. So this is also related to what I mentioned before. And we were talking about being biomedical, psychosocial, and in reality, we have done this. As a matter of fact, I think that unfortunately, we have some last situations going on, and I do believe that we're still just really focusing on a more of a biomedical perspective. With that, I would like to finish. And I don't know who got a hand raised. This is just to supplement something that I wanted to mention and comment. This is for our moderator. Thank you so much, Flor. I had the participation of Zulma. I think that she had a connection issue, so thank you so much. Okay, thank you. I hope that you can hear me there. So I just wanted to round up or summarize everything that we have been mentioning. And now concerning the convention, we perfectly know that the convention is just related to people with disabilities. This is an answer to a lot of things that take place. Specifically, we know that people with disabilities had been just really striving year after year to do all of this. This is something where we could really find the different needs that were part of this convention, and we know that these are part of the different principles. So all needs, I think that we lost her. We lost the connection of Dr. Zulma. So while she reconnects, please go ahead, doctor. Thank you. This is very short, 30 seconds. First and foremost, we do not only have to talk about social policies. Social policies are also economic policies. And I think that we also need we need the interventions of whoever is part of that scheme, that we're just really taking a look at the different deficiencies. So we need to talk about economic policies. Secondly, this is related to care and carers. They started with gender perspective and just we really try to really take a look at non-paid work. And right now, whenever we think about this situation of well-being, we're talking about caring children. So we cannot really start just really somehow restricting concept, because the economy of care is cross-disciplinary. It's not really focused on other measures. It's also related to well-being. So we need to open or broaden the scope of our concepts and everything that we do. Thank you so much, Dr. John. Zulma, I don't know if you're there, if you can hear us. Yes. I don't know what's going on. My internet goes on and on. So I just wanted to wrap it up by saying that, luckily enough, there are certain organizations, civil society, where we see that the state, specifically in Latin America, have progressed in terms of law, and they have also managed to just really somehow meet what we have been doing as people with disabilities. Unfortunately, everything is going way too slow, and I'm talking about my country. I'm talking about Paraguay. After 20 years, nothing has been changed or modified, or any, let's say, documents, terms, the constitution. We still talk about exceptional persons. There are some laws that also talk about, well, person who are disabled, that's how they call them, all of these improper terms. And that's what really causes us to continue talking about, let's say, some very specific answers. And we know that our states are way too slow when it comes to changing all of these terms. Thank you. Thank you so much. I will pass the floor to Amalia right now for her intervention, and then very quickly to the last part. Okay, very briefly, I just wanted to comment that I will continue restricting the different concepts, because whenever we talk about disabilities, there's no way where we can just go back to talking about carers. We're talking about the example of children. We cannot just compare children with persons with disabilities, because otherwise we're going to go back to this existentialistic approach. So I just wanted to clarify that whenever we talk about disabilities, we will continue just to continue with the term. We are opposing to that term. Thank you, Dr. John. Please go ahead. I agree. We're talking about context term. I'm talking about the fact that this concept of care as well. So we're talking about everything that we're mentioning. We're talking about a lot of considerations. It's not just a concept that refers to carer, but just the actions that are behind it. Okay, very briefly, I would like to ask panel members to just have a very short intervention. We have another comment that is going to start at noon. So the very last question, what are reasonable adjustments and how do they need to be applied? So please, I would like to ask you to use the tool. I would like to ask Amalia to please participate, and then Flor, please go ahead. And also Martha, please go ahead. And then the next panel members will continue to talk about. So all of these adjustable terms had already been applied to conflict resolutions that arose in other topics, specifically religious topics. But this is the very first time in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities where this is used specifically to refer to persons with disabilities. And this is just for us to be able to just really address all of this. We're talking about these topics and to talk about the situations where whenever we have a standard policy procedure or whatever that has been made in a, let's say, a neutral way, in certain situations, in very concrete cases, there are some just unfair situations. For that reason, we try to just really have a fair position and just to really make some differences so that we can really start accordingly when it comes to according to law. This is related to general accessibility and reasonable adjustments. Accessibility depends on having a universal access that we've had. So we've had some temporary issues, like Martha said, and we have this accessibility, elderly and pregnant women and all of that. We have persons with disabilities in general. So all of these reasonable adjustments in general are an individual situation, and that has to be agreed upon with a person with disabilities, the person with disabilities that is requesting it, in such a way where that person that requires that reasonable adjustment and a vendor of a service or whoever has that service and whoever has education, what is the way in which that person in particular can really address things and make them just really settled? They need to have an agreement with a person that is requiring an adjustment or a settlement in such a way. We need to think as well. This is in order so that we can just really make some sort of adjustments. And this could also be included in some equal conditions in the society where we can just really just somehow turn down all of these barriers that are there. Thank you so much, Amalia. Thank you, Flor. In Colombia, we have had some very interesting debates in terms of, let's say, reasonable adjustments the concept of accessibility and universal design in the framework of public policies. This is something that has been even demanding with persons with disabilities. There's criticism regarding the term of reasonable adjustments. It seems that they're only for persons with disabilities, but that's not the case. At any point in time in our lives, and also based on all of this diversity that the human being sees, and based on those intersectionalities, that's something that also needs to be part of the populational aspect. And we know that this is part of this concept. Reasonable adjustment is something that is going to help us do all of that. And this is something that can help us with all of that. So accordingly, that reasonable adjustment also needs to just really be related to all of these designs that we have and accessibility in general. In this context, I can talk about a situation that is very relevant in Colombia, and that's one of the main questions that we have. This is a matter of labor inclusion, and it's a debate, it's a barrier that we need to see people overcoming and professionals that support all of this. This is a question that we see many times. We see that I can have just inclusion. If I cannot really have an adjustment, then the question is, I know that I cannot make this adjustment, and something that also just happened as a human being did not consider a design of universal just impact, so we can start thinking of that. Another thing that we need to consider as well in the Colombian context is the fact that there's going to be this parameter of comparison analysis of everything that we have as well. We have reasonable support. That's another topic that in Colombia we started to really see just really becoming more and more relevant. So from the same perspective of the different facilitators that can help us, that's how can I really have a lot of, let's say, work with facilitators in that context. Basically, what we have seen is that according to the conversation in Colombia, we know that universal accessibility is a topic that comes from public actions and that comes in the framework of policies. Today in Colombia, talking about reasonable adjustments, for instance, in terms of inclusion. So we know that the LGBT community has to do with some sort of reasonable adjustment as well. And this is something that is specifically related to the adjustments or the supports that we need to even consider at a level or of international organization and culture. And well, accordingly, we have a perspective where, well, we can really focus on that. Thank you. Thank you so much, Flor. Thank you so much for your intervention. Please go ahead, Martha. Now, reasonable adjustment are specific measures so that we can just really ensure equal opportunities with people with which we are in, whether in a labor environment, educational environment. This could be things like improving the physical environment or maybe some sort of practice. However, something that I believe to be important and that Flor just mentioned is that we do not necessarily need this for persons with disabilities. Yes, they're also happening and taking place in this universal accessibility because this is something that is not ensured or certain as well. It is important as well to just highlight the fact we know that equal conditions, this is for us to be able to get to a place or to a location. So this is something that, well, this may, of course, change the situation for a person with disabilities or a person with no disabilities. This means that this is not a disproportionate load in terms of just, let's say, everything that we have as part of, let's say, some sort of a tactile aspect or an elevator. I mean, this is something that has to be tailor-made. And an example that I usually just give whenever we talk about reasonable adjustments, a couple of years ago, we were using some sort of mouse, computer mouse that is used for persons, but in my case, it was difficult for me to slide it and I need to use both hands. That also impacts on the fact that that made me just really take longer than my just working on all of that, and that also just help us really working on all of that. However, it is a reasonable adjustment that we just had. I had just a mouse, and they bought many, and they said try them out. And there was one that had a very big ball, let's call it. It was very easy to slide. I would just put my hand there and some other buttons to the side that were huge. That reasonable adjustment in my case changed my productivity entirely. Why? Because it was something that was appropriate to my needs, the needs that I had at the time. This may be the example of a reasonable adjustment. So one of these characteristics, and I repeat, is that this may be just an adjustment in terms of time. So let's say maybe a time, let's say like schedule. Maybe the fact that I can just get in later because it's difficult for me to go in the public transportation during peak times. That could be a reasonable adjustment. Okay, thank you so much for giving that explanation. So thank you so much for sharing your experience. Please go ahead, Carolina. And I would like to just restate my request of just being very, very brief. Please go ahead. So I think that you already mentioned this. The only thing that I wanted to just add is that reasonable adjustments are a tool so that we do not leave anyone behind, so that we cannot deny any just righted persons with disabilities. And why? Because it comes from denial, or we usually say, oh, okay, no, you cannot do this or anything or whatever. No, I cannot do that or whatever. So that's precisely where things just start stemming from. We all are entitled to all of this. We need a tool so that we can really start just really exercising our rights and without leaving anyone behind. Thank you. No, thank you. Amalia, I think that you raised your hand. Just please, just a final comment. Yes, I will be very brief. I just wanted to highlight the fact that yes, as a matter of fact, like I mentioned, it is not only for persons with disabilities. What I mentioned is that for the very first time, we started to talk about reasonable adjustments for persons with disabilities in the convention. We were not talking about other, we had not talked about this in other estimates. And as Marta just mentioned, she gave great examples. We have to be very careful with what we call disproportionate burden, because it also leads to different questionings. And it is not easy to answer these questions because denying the fact that we need this type of reasonable adjustment is something that is considered discrimination. So we need to be very careful whenever we need to think that disproportionate burden is just a pretext so that we do not make these reasonable adjustments. So yes, as a matter of fact, it is not easy to determine according to the examples that Marcia just mentioned. They're just making things clearer, but we need to be very careful when it comes to really considering where we need to consider things, how are things being determined, in what circumstances things are done, what is the responsibility of the state or of members. But we cannot forget that it is in coordination, individual coordination, a person with disabilities, and that just really denying them is something that is part of the general observation of Section 5 on discrimination as discrimination. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sulma. I saw that you started to raise your hand, so you're going to have just one last minute comment. I just wanted to supplement what Amelia was mentioning. So this is something that we can just leave it as it is. She already just touched on all of the points that I wanted to mention. Dr. John, any final comment? This is just an invitation because I think that this is very important as well. So these are the interventions of Professor Esperanza, and we need to invite CIS for them to be just really taking part in this presentation or to somehow just really continue working in this study. So thank you so much for this invite as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Oh no, thank you. Again, we will just be taking down all of the notes. And just please just consider that we will have seats here. My apologies because we ran out of time. All I have to do is just really thank all of the panel members. There's no question about it that definitely talking about disability has a lot of sides, a lot of nuances as well. Thank you so much.